historical legacy is the holdout wing. It's about who roll over and who stand firm still. How the story will be told to the generation coming. It's these kind of things to be careful with. If it's third world poverty and decimated, it's about the down spiral and how we stop it. If you build public service, building a magnificent edifice, then let it be to house magnificent spirit. Imagine how magnificent the sentiment is when you acknowledgely serve your people to their benefit. Oh yes, oh yeah. In the same boat we, in the same boat we, yeah. Let's try to see in the same boat we in the same boat, in the same boat we, in the same boat we. Let's try to see we in the same boat we.
I, Haile Selassie I, Emperor of Ethiopia, am here today to claim that justice which is due to my people, and the assistance promised to it 8 months ago, when 50 nations asserted that aggression had been committed in violation of international treaties. There is no precedent for a head of state himself speaking in this assembly, but there is also no precedent for a people being victim of such injustice and being at present threatened by abandonment to its aggressor. Also, there has never before been an example of any government proceeding to the systematic extermination of a nation by barbarous means, in violation of the most solemn promises made by the nations of the earth that there should not be used against innocent human beings the terrible poison of harmful gases. It is to defend a people struggling for the age-old independence that the head of the Ethiopian Empire has come to Geneva to fulfill this supreme duty, after having himself fought at the head of his armies. I pray to Almighty God that he may spare nations the terrible sufferings that have just been inflicted on my people, and of which the chiefs who accompany me here have been the horrified witnesses. It is my duty to inform the governments assembled in Geneva, responsible as they are for the lives of millions of men, women, and children, of the deadly peril which threatens them, by describing to them the fate which has been suffered by Ethiopia. It is not only upon warriors that the Italian government has made war. It has above all attacked populations far removed from hostilities in order to terrorize and exterminate them. At the beginning, towards the end of 1935, Italian aircraft hurled upon my armies bombs of tear gas. Their effects were but slight. The soldiers learned to scatter, waiting until the wind had rapidly dispersed the poisonous gases. The Italian aircraft then resorted to mustard gas. Barrels of liquid were hurled upon armed groups, but this means was also not effective. The liquid affected only a few soldiers, and barrels upon the ground were themselves a warning to troops and to the population of the danger. It was at the time when the operations for encircling Makale were taking place that the Italian command, fearing a rout, followed the procedure which is now my duty to denounce to the world. Special sprayers were installed on board aircraft so that they could vaporize over vast areas of territory a fine, death-dealing rain. Groups of 9, 15, 18 aircraft followed one another so that the fog issuing from them formed a continuous sheet. It was thus that from the end of January 1936, soldiers, women, children, cattle, rivers, lakes, and pastures were drenched continually with this deadly rain in order to kill off systematically all living creatures, in order to more surely to poison waters and pastures. The Italian command made its aircraft pass over and over again. That was its chief method of warfare. So you have fleets of thousands of jet aircraft today, retrofitted, and these are commercial aircraft with retrofitted nozzles mounted onto the wing pylons just in front of the jet stream to make it look like this stuff is coming out of the engine and it's condensation. And so they give you the condensation lie, and like so many other things, you just swallow that up and accept that as reality, and you don't ever review anything other than that. You would just double down every time and argue till the end. You've done no amount of study into the subject. You don't even know what kind of engine is on the commercial jet aircraft. Just like I didn't, until I started doing some objective research and a bit of investigation. And what I found out is horrifying. It's shocking. At times it's depressing. Because the further you look into the issue, the darker the horizon gets. And that's what scares most people from actually facing the truth. Ultimately, why they're scared to face the truth is because that process entails shadow work. Work upon yourself into gaining knowledge over yourself so that you can then govern your decision making here on earth, right now, in these times right now. So that opening quotation is from Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia, His Imperial Majesty. Again, the year was 1936. That was in Geneva, Switzerland. That was a very serious turning point, because although that was just the opening, and I encourage you to go and read the entire speech, I'm gonna jump ahead a bit in history to 1963, the inverse of 36, and read to you the opening of, again, His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I, addressing the United Nations General Assembly. So, couple things to know. There has never been any other head of state who addressed both the League and the United Nations in the capacity of, directly addressing. There on the podium in the presence of the entire group. So that's significant. So again, this next excerpt is coming out of the 1963 address to the General Assembly of the United Nations by His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I. 27 years ago, as Emperor of Ethiopia, I mounted the rostrum in Geneva, Switzerland, to address the League of Nations and to appeal for relief from the destruction which had been unleashed against my defenseless nation by the fascist invader. I spoke then both to and for the conscience of the world. My words went unheeded, but history testifies to the accuracy of the warning that I gave in 1936. Today, I stand before the world organization which has succeeded to the mantle discarded by its discredited predecessor. In this body is enshrined the principle of collective security, which I unsuccessfully invoked at Geneva. Here, in this assembly, reposes the best, perhaps the last, hope for the peaceful survival of mankind. In 1936, I declared that it was not the covenant of the League that was at stake, but international morality. Undertakings, I said then, are of little worth if the will to keep them is lacking. The Charter of the United Nations expresses the noblest aspirations of man: abjuration of force in the settlement of disputes between states, the assurance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, the safeguarding of international peace and security. But there too, as were the phrases of the covenant, are only words. Their value depends wholly on our will to observe and honor them and give them content and meaning. The preservation of peace and the guaranteeing of man's basic freedoms and rights require courage and eternal vigilance, courage to speak and act, and if necessary, to suffer and die for truth and justice, eternal vigilance. That is the least transgression of international morality, shall not go undetected and unremedied. These lessons must be learned anew by each succeeding generation, and that generation is fortunate indeed which learns from other than its own bitter experience. This organization and each of its members bear a crushing and awesome responsibility to absorb the wisdom of history and to apply to it the problems of the present, in order that future generations may be born and live and die in peace. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to jump to the end. I highly recommend spending a lengthy amount of time reviewing both the 1936 address to the General Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland, of the League of Nations, and the 1963 address by His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I to the General Assembly of the United Nations. Okay, so again, this is the closing statements of the 1963 address to the United Nations. The stake of each one of us is identical: life or death. We all wish to live. We all seek a world in which men are freed of the burdens of ignorance, poverty, hunger, and disease, and we shall all be hard-pressed to escape the deadly rain of nuclear fallout should catastrophe overtake us. When I spoke at Geneva in 1936, there was no precedent for a head of state addressing the League of Nations. I am neither the first, nor will I be the last head of state to address the United Nations, but only I have addressed both the League and this organization in this capacity. The problems which confront us today are equally unprecedented. They have no counterparts in human experience. Men search the pages of history for solutions, for precedents, but there are none. This, then, is the ultimate challenge. Where are we to look for our survival, for the answers to the questions which have never before been posed? We must look first to Almighty God, who has raised man above the animals and endowed him with intelligence and reason. We must put our faith in him, and he will not desert us or permit us to destroy humanity which he created in his image. And we must look into ourselves, into the depths of our souls. We must become something we have never been, and for which our education and experience and environment have ill prepared us. We must become bigger than we have been, more courageous, greater in spirit, larger in outlook. We must become members of a new race, overcoming petty prejudice, owing our ultimate allegiance not to nations, but to our fellow men within the human community. Connect the dots between those two speeches and review some of the historical facts that have happened in between time and in the meantime and what you have going on right now. For example, retrofitted nozzles mounted onto jet aircraft. These are commercial planes, you know, maybe not in actually flying people around, but the planes are being used. They take those same jets that would go by kind of undetected. There goes a jet that's got plumes of vaporized material coming out of the back of it. In 1936, it was vaporized mustard gas, right? So if the technology existed in 1936 to systematically fill the sky with clouds of poisonous material, literally raining down, and meant to systematically kill all living creatures, the entire web of life below. And here we are in 2023, where you have fleets of thousands of jet aircraft that are dumping 50 to 70 million tons of nanoparticles into the global skies annually. Don't believe me on that. I'm not asking you to believe me on that. I'm not asking you to ride up on a hype and say, yeah, he knows about the chemtrails. I'm not about the chemtrail thing. Okay? In private conversations, yeah, that can be used. Everybody understands what we're talking about. But when you're speaking to the general public, it's good to use the scientific terms that are being pumped into the mainstream propaganda outlets right now, with all this plans and procedures to try to what? You know what I mean? Wait, make a man like me feel crazy? Because it's just a plan and a procedure. That's what the Harvard University scientist David Keith talks. You know? No. Because in 1963, right, which is the same year that the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated and replaced by Lyndon B. Johnson, who in 1962 says on the record, talking about at that time they had the control over the world's cloud layer, and that the goal was to ultimately control the weather, because he who controls the world, controls the weather, controls the world. These are things you can easily look up online. So in 1963, now you have the ability to control the weather. And remember, in 1936, His Majesty said it was their chief method of warfare. So you think that changed? You think militaries of the earth went to some type of extremely effective weaponry, as using jet aircraft to do whatever agenda you had in the air from above to assault people? So they come in the mask of trying to cover the earth in solar radiation management with stratospheric aerosol injections, that they would be using this to blanket the sun, right? The sun, like to blanket the earth, so that there would be a reflective layer of particles to be reflected back into space. You know? They don't ever mention anything about the type of toxicity. They don't care about any of that. They don't want you to care about any of that. They don't want you to catch on to how deadly the ramifications of these geoengineering operations are. Because if you did, you'd say no. Not only would you say no, but you would be going looking for anybody involved in the actual operations, anybody involved in the cover-up. They would be your new enemy. And that is what they don't want. But it doesn't matter what they want or they don't want, or what anybody wants or don't want. And I'll tell you why. Because the bottom baseline is abrupt biosphere collapse that is unfolding right now. Abrupt climate collapse. Abrupt ecological collapse. So, in the same fashion that they were systematically killing every living creature in vast areas of Ethiopia in 1936, that is what has occurred and what is occurring right now on an entirely epic proportion. And so, it's completely global in scale. The contamination is completely ubiquitous all over the planet. It's the same thing. And we have statistics that back up these conclusions. They're not things you're just going to find CNN reporting on. 90% of Atlantic population, for 90% of the Atlantic plankton populations have been completely devastated. They're gone. The base of the food chain and the number one oxygen supplier on the planet in the Atlantic Ocean, 90% gone. Let's stay in the oceans. Bluefin tuna, 98% gone. Populations, 98% gone. Pelagic fish populations in general, globally, 90% gone. Global insect populations, 80 to 90% gone. Wildlife populations, down 70% over the last 40 years. The current species extinction rate is 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect go extinct every 24 hours. You have the ocean superheating, ocean level risings down all a mile deep. This is a momentum. There's a momentum happening right now that it's long past the point of no return. There's no switch to turn this off. What's happening? And you can pretend and you can hang around people who like to pretend that there's nothing wrong or that the whole climate thing is just a hoax because it's been proved from these hypocritical politicians. And, you know, we have these evidence of a new ice age coming in, and so it's not even global warming. No. All of that is total fantasy. It's all lies, all deception. And it's pumped out through every source of media. Alternative, mainstream, people's Instagram accounts, people's YouTube accounts, just the average Joe spitting blabble that he hasn't really taken the time to look into. He hasn't processed information through the trivium, a method of intaking information, processing it in a way that is going through a filter of strict logic to remove all contradictions. A path to true truth discovery. Something that should be instilled into children from a very early age. Okay, if you want to look into it, it's called the trivium. Trifold. Always the three. All connects back to Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia. You have a bias against that? What, you got some kind of image in your mind of some Rasta man in a hammock bunning a spliff, you know, listening to some reggae on the beach? So you think that's what's Rasta? Rastafari is about saving souls. This is spiritual warfare you have going on. And now you even have scientists, high credible scientists, big time doctors in the earth, you know, who eyes are busting wide open because of the whole scenario that's been unfolding over the last few years and the dire consequences of people not thinking for themselves that's starting to come to light right now. And if that hurts and stings a little bit, good, it should. You know? If you got away unscathed, you should count your blessings and start to open your eyes to the evidence that's coming to light. And it's beginning to be that there's no holding it back. It's an exponential, explosive mode right now. Because the body count has gotten too high. So just like what happened in the case of America pulling out of Vietnam, because the body count had gotten too high, the people of America, everybody had lost somebody in that war. There was no public support at all, so it went away. This is the type of thing we need to start to understand the threats. The same evil energy that backed and influenced Mussolini, Benito Mussolini to invade sovereign Ethiopia in 1935 and 1936 is the same force that fueled Hitler's Nazi Germany, Stalin's Russia, and I don't even know what to call this modern manifestation that you call the United States of America. This entity is called USA. You could look at it like United States of America or United States of America, LLC. It's a corporation filed with the SEC, just like every other government on the planet. This is the world that you live in, that you're waking up to, or you're resisting waking up to. And the harder your life gets, the more impossible it's going to be to deny reality. The longer you hold on to the illusion, the worse it's going to be for you. Because if you completely identify with the material world, that means that you're constantly scared of death. If you've been completely disconnected from the reality of spirit or the spiritual reality that is simultaneously always going on with the physical. As a matter of fact, down to the atomic size, you have 99% space. So what you perceive as material reality is really just a configuration of atoms. And the atom still spins on a spiritual spark. So let's play with the word atom. ATOM. MOTA. Mother. Mota. Atom is the building block of matter. Let's play with a phonetic similarity. Atom. ADAM. MADA. Mother. Mata. Matter of fact. Mother. Mother. What brings life? Is it not the mother? The mother? Yeah. So the atom is the building blocks of the material world. And it spins on a spiritual spark. So there is evidence right there that there is this mystical coordination, cooperation between spiritual and physical, spiritual and material, that brings to life the universe. So, what is the importance of that? Well, for each, you'll have your own ways of finding significance in any piece of information. On the Children Health Defense website, there's being featured right now a premiere of a Holocaust survivor named Vera Shara. And I've only watched the first one so far, but that's enough to spark to stay tuned. And what this docu-series is doing, it's called Never Again, has gone global or something similar to that. But it's putting the parallels between the Holocaust in Nazi Germany in the late 30s, going into the early 40s, leading into World War II. And the reason I bring that up is because when His Majesty in 1936 addressed the League of Nations, and the League of Nations went bad on its covenants, and it fell short, and the world conscience at that moment, that time, didn't stand up for genuine morality. That's why in 1963, he opened up by saying that history testified to the accuracy of the warning he gave. So you have the statesman extraordinaire of Britain, of Great Britain, Winston Churchill, on the record. I am unable to find the direct quote at this time, but I have read it and seen it with my own eyes, that if it weren't for the League of Nations ignoring His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I, Kadamawi Haile Selassie, the events of World War II would have not unfolded the way they did. Because when them boys in Germany saw that the League of Nations did nothing when confronted with holding up their word, holding up the tenets of their covenant, that's a booster. That's a booster shot for evil. When evil sees evil go unchecked, evil says, yeah, let we go. So in the unraveling of the whole pandemic narrative, and it being shown for what it is by thousands of courageous doctors and scientists around the world who are not stopping blowing the trumpet on what they're finding, I found it very moving that Vera Shara would come out and direct such as a docu-series that made those parallels. Because one thing that's missing from the discourse of these doctors and scientists when they lay out what they're finding is the why the global power structure are playing cards that they cannot return from. The cards that are being laid out on the table have been laid out on the table. They can't just be picked back up. It's like you show the whole table, the cards you have in your deck. You might as well throw down your cards and go home, right? Why are they moving so desperate, so erratic? The background music of abrupt biosphere collapse is important to have playing. Well, it's always playing, but it's important to be listening to and always have it there. so that when you see these ridiculously outrageous policies and measures being implemented, you can know, oh, that's why this is happening right now. Because as soon as the populations of the world catch on to the severity, to the immediacy of what's unfolding on planet Earth right now, in terms of the habitats of human beings no longer being able to support human beings, there's going to be wide scale panic. And at that point, the controllers who have been controlling the paradigm for millennia lose their control, lose everything they've been working so hard towards. So as scary as the totalitarian takeover of planet Earth seems right now to those who are informed, the reality is far scarier. And this is coming from a father of young children with a baby in the womb right now. So, what are we to do about this situation that we find ourselves in? It starts with educating yourself, with rehabilitating your damaged mind. Because if your mind was healthy, you'd have no problem looking at whatever the facts were, whatever the information is, regardless to how dire that data is. You just look at that and face it so you can face reality and make decisions that make sense through logic and reason. Well, some would say, why? You talk such a dread talk, man. All these things that you say are going on in the climate and so on and so forth. Why are you still bringing babies into the world? That's what my mom said to me the other day. My mom said to me, if the world is so dread, why are you still bringing babies into it? I said, because I'll never stop bringing light into this world. You think some psychopathic agenda, satanic priest class, is going to stop the will of Jah? You really are brain damaged if you think that. So we must become something that we have never been, that our education has ill prepared us for. Our environment has ill prepared us for this. This is that moment that His Majesty was referring to. This is that final hour. And remember what they say ended World War II was atomic bombs being dropped on innocent civilian populations in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. Since then, 2,000 plus nuclear explosions have occurred on the planet. Do you think that the ones who orchestrated the dropping of those bombs care anything about you and your posterity? Care anything about any aspect of the web of life? Again, if you think that, you're brain damaged. If you think the government of the worlds the governments of the world have your best interest in mind and that of human evolution, well, you're in a very dark place. And I mean that on a spiritual level. You're in a very dark place. But it's not hopeless. Even for the ones who are the most asleep at the wheel, you can still spark an idea in their head before they transition out of this lifetime that may help them in that transition. Because we're not going anywhere. Look, at the time of human death, right, there's a measurable weight that goes completely unaccounted for. Not moisture loss, not bowel movement loss, blood loss, none of that. They've done experiments that conclusively prove that there is a measurable weight that goes unaccounted for. Something leaves the physical structure that is significant enough to show up on a finely tuned scale. Where does that go? What is that? What you do here and what you experience here in the physical is not insignificant. You're not just a dust. You're not just a piece of dust. You're a piece of stardust. You're a piece of all of creation molded up into the structure. Growth. His Majesty didn't suggest or say this might happen or it could happen or it should happen or it may happen. He said it must happen. And the reason I put so much weight on His Majesty's must is because when he said something and said what was coming down the pipeline, and then it came down the pipeline, wouldn't you agree that that's somebody who has credibility, whose word means something? And why has history completely made the works of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I basically obsolete, completely omitted in any significant way, from any significant way? You know, what's this about? Well, I highly suggest you start to study the occult, the hidden realms of knowledge, things that necessarily can't be written down for you and explained to you in a purely left brain fashion. It's a holistic way of looking at things, of reality, where green language, nature's language, the language of the birds and the bees and the fish and the insects and the little babies, the sounds, the phonetics, the messages.
For them, to them, feed them, pre-spoke their events to them, and still be a witness without bitterness. Speak righteous judgment to them, till it's of no more significance. What the word of Rastafari intends, feed them, to them. Yeah, the lamb that return ya with a lion head, only this time upon a throne seated, humble and perfected in a righteousness, All the like-minded know they needed strength. When goals line up along allegiances, that's when realization overtake them. When the magnitude and scope of what they stand against turn into entire whole world events. In a victory and defeat, in a pride and shame, show up in a time magazine lens. Hague and Geneva, you beginning or you end. The words Haile Selassie I the first said to them. A line of priests where Moses not mention them. At the altar no man gave any attendance. Hebrews 7:11 the order of Melchizedek. Number 6 the Levitical priesthood said, as these were the high priests in Israel. Then after the similitude of Melchizedek of Salem, the Lion number Judah get itself evident, rightful ruler of the earth conscience, the ordinance and the law in prosperity sense. Feed them, for them, to them, feed them. Priests spoke their events to them, and still bear witness without bitterness. Speak righteous judgment to them. Did it of no more significance? What the word of Rastafari intends?